Hi everybody, thank you very much. Orlando Ruiz Jr., welcome to another classic movie review. It is time for me to get into some of the work of the great Quentin Tarantino. I have yet to talk about his work on my channel yet. I did discuss a little bit of Pulp Fiction because I did a video on my top 25 favorite movies of the 1990s. So of course, one of his movies had to make it on that list. But right now I am talking about his very first film from 1992, a movie that I saw when I was only 9 years old and blew me away. Reservoir Dogs. I had no business watching this at such a young age, but back then I was trying to always kind of push myself to watch things like The Untouchables or Scarface or The Godfather and Goodfellas, because that was the stuff that my older sister was watching and she was into all the crime stuff. And so I had to admit, I kind of piggybacked onto that at such a young age. About 2 years ago, this film turned 30 years old, and in all that time, we've had a lot of generic crime films come and gone, and some pretty good, but a lot of movies that just kind of become forgotten. But Reservoir Dogs is one of those movies that packs such a punch that to this day, it's still being felt by audiences and filmmakers around the world that still feel its influence. Not long after Tarantino's breakout with Reservoir Dogs, of course, there was that big explosion, the phenomenon that was Pulp Fiction, and then an entire subgenre of these kind of movies came out where you had all these low-level criminals in like a day in the life type of stuff where you had things like 2 Days in the Valley, and you also had, Guy Ritchie's Snatch and Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. We also got Eight Heads in a Duffel Bag and Things to Do in Denver When You're Dead and Suicide Kings. Very cool movies, but the kinds of movies that we wouldn't have gotten if it wasn't for Tarantino coming along, laying the groundwork for that kind of style for other directors to want to come and try their hand at it. And a lot of great independent film directors are coming out around that time. People like Richard Linklater, Jim Jarmusch, Steve Soderbergh, and of course the great Spike Lee. You had Doug Liman and Kevin Smith. And Tarantino's Reservoir Dogs is one of the best works amongst all these directors. Reservoir Dogs has a great ensemble cast of actors: Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Michael Madsen, Chris Penn, Lawrence Tierney, Steve Buscemi, Eddie Bunker. Quentin Tarantino has a role that he's pretty good in. At the very beginning of the film, we meet these guys all sitting around a breakfast table at a restaurant. From the very first scene that we're introduced to these guys as they're having breakfast with each other, we kind of get a bit of the camaraderie, and even though we get a bit of their personalities in that scene, we don't understand what they're all about yet because it's kind of just a bit of an introduction. But that moment, that introduction there is enough to bring about quite a bit of intrigue about who these guys are and what's going to happen. And there's a great shot where the camera kind of does a 360 all around the table and just keeps it steady on everybody's faces as they kind of just have dialogue going around the table. And it's very, very effective, very well done. After the opening scene, we see the main characters walking towards the frame in slow motion to a very cool song. We get our title, we have a minute of opening credits, and then bam, they hit us with an image of Mr. Orange sitting in the back seat of a car getting blood everywhere because he's been shot. And so we're just thrust into this story without knowing how we've come to this point. And then the movie basically kind of fills in the gaps as we watch, and we see our main characters end up in a warehouse where they rendezvous, and then things get really intense. They get really paranoid. Nobody knows who to trust. Basically, what we have here is a heist movie where we don't see the heist. We hear them talk about it. Of course, this being a Tarantino movie, you know the characters are going to be fun to watch, and even though it's his first film, Reservoir Dogs is no exception. The characters in this film are wild as hell at times, and they can be pretty unpredictable, and some are pretty colorful, some have a bit of mystery to them. Another very fun aspect of this film that kind of differentiated it from a lot of other crime films of its era is its use of nonlinear storytelling, something that Quentin Tarantino really kind of goes on to master in his follow-up film Pulp Fiction to a higher degree. It's kind of a way to keep the audience off balance and one step behind, I guess, which really works for the story since the characters in the story are off balanced and kind of always one step behind. This being a Quentin Tarantino movie, it's not without certain scenes of violence, and even though we've come to expect hyper stylized violence and like super choreographed gunfights and fights in a lot of his films like Django Unchained or Kill Bill, the violence in this movie is kind of toned down, kind of gritty and realistic, kind of fitting for the setting and the story. And because the story takes place in this confined warehouse for the most part, majority of the film takes place inside this warehouse, and so it really forces the creators and the filmmakers to do as much as they can to make every single scene, every single shot, every single line of dialogue count from beginning to end. So after the big heist goes to hell, a couple of the robbers make it to the rendezvous. They begin to talk about what happened, what went wrong, and they begin to come to the conclusion that there might be a rat within their group. And that's when things really get interesting and really tense within this group of guys. And the paranoia level really spikes up, especially when the movie lets us know who the rat is. As the film reaches its climax and a certain rat's identity is revealed to the group, things really come to a boiling point by the end, and there is a bit of a body count by the time it's over. When making this movie, Tarantino must have been inspired by some of his filmmaking heroes, people like Martin Scorsese, which is why a lot of the characters in this film feel like they could be out of a Scorsese film. You can also tell by the way he shoots certain things in certain wide angles that he's also a big fan of the work of John Carpenter, and you can see a lot of his love of the people he admired and grew up watching poured into this very first movie. This is a great film, and even though this is kind of derivative of a lot of films that came before it, because there is an entire genre of movies like this is one of the best films of that genre. Reservoir Dogs from 1992 is a masterpiece. This is a 4-star classic, one of Tarantino's best films. Amazing that it's his very first. Out of all of Tarantino's movies, the story might be the most simplest here aside from Death Proof, but it's really watching these actors that really is the fun of watching this movie. The movie is filled with great performances. Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, Steve Buscemi, these guys kill it in these roles. And of course, Michael Madsen is awesome as Mr. Blonde. Reservoir Dogs is definitely a movie that you can find on streaming. I'm sure you can find it on some platform out there, but if you want to get yourself a hard copy while they're out there, definitely nothing wrong with that. This is my copy of the Blu-ray. I had a copy of this on VHS back in the day when it came out. First time I ever heard of this movie was a preview for it on my VHS copy of Universal Soldier back in 1992. And yeah, that's how I first got wind of Reservoir Dogs. But that trailer for this movie really got me interested. Even at the age of 9 years old, I was like, what's that? Gotta check that out. Thank you all very much for watching this classic movie review. I always appreciate it. If you're into movies, if you're into classics, if you're into this kind of thing, do me a favor and hit the bell. Become a subscriber. Please don't forget to comment, share, like. Always helps out the channel. If you're a returning viewer, thank you very much for your support. I thank you. I appreciate you. Till next time, peace out. Take care.